everyone, and thank you for your participation at our webinar. So this is a webinar organized by Rome Local Group of Women Aerospace in collaboration with the Space Economy Evolution Lab of the SDA Bocconi School of Management. So today, with our speakers, we will talk about one of the important topics of the space economy that concern the exploration activities on the moon. So, as you know, the return to the moon is nowadays on the agenda of the major space agency, but also from commercial perspective has become a domain of interest also for private companies, entrepreneurs and investors that now have the aim to develop tangible business-driven dynamic. So for this reason, also the discussion on public-private partnership models is rising. So it's important to discuss also today. So a partnership in which governments will provide an important initial support in the exploration and in particular to develop critical technologies, as you know, for example, the telecommunication around the moon, and also for the construction of space infrastructure. So today, with the collaboration with our speakers, we will discuss about the role of the governments in the exploration phases on the moon with the two perspectives of the ESA and the Space Foundation. But we will also have the point of view of the academic point of view, so the SDA Bocconi, with the presentation, first of all, of the results of our research regarding the space resource utilization. In particular, this research was focused on lunar ice. And finally, we'll have the presentation about the models of public-private partnership that could be appropriate for this kind of activities. So I want to remember to our audience that after the presentation, we will have a Q&A time. So if you want, you can use the chat that you can see in the Zoom platform. So your question will be very welcome. So now we can, I think that we can start because the time is running. So, and now I have the pleasure to present our first speaker. The first speaker, Shelley Brunswick, she is a Chief Operating Officer of Space Foundation. She brings a broad perspective and deep vision on the global space ecosystem. From a distinguished career as a space acquisition and program management leader and congressional liaison for the US Air Force, to her current role, including the Center for Innovation and Education, Symposium, and the Global Alliance. So Shelley collaborates with organizations around the world to connect commercial, government, and education sectors. Actually, Shelley participates with the Women in Aerospace Foundation, Women's Global Gathering, United Nations Space for Women, Global Policy Institute, and Colorado Springs Chamber. So, Mrs. Shelley, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much. It's an honor to be joining all of you this evening. It's morning time here in Colorado, so I appreciate you taking time on your Friday evening to join us for a very good discussion, and I'm honored to be invited and participating, so thank you all. What I'd like to do is bring up some slides to kind of walk through what is the global space economy, what does it mean, and then tie it into the questions from the abstract that we're trying to answer. What is the role of government as we press on to the moon? What is in it for, you know, non-space actors, you know, those who will benefit from going to the moon? What is a public-private partnership? So we'll walk through those questions, and I know I'm watching my time and I will be respectful of my other panelists. So at Space Foundation, we believe that space should be for all of us. So that means everyone should have the opportunity to participate in space, whether that means going out to space, being part of space ecosystem on Earth, or benefiting from the space exploration. So we believe in advocating for innovation to better life here on Earth. We have three main areas that I'll talk about, and I'm really going to only talk about one, but we have our Symposium 365, and that division is what houses our annual Space Symposium. So annually, the Space Foundation brings together the global space economy, that's military, commercial, civil, and international, to Colorado in the US, where they talk about policies, where the economy is going, they do business development, and they have lots of opportunity to highlight and interact with the global space community, both government as well as the commercial sector. So that's a very important role, especially as we look to go on to the moon and Mars and beyond. So that's in our 365. We do have a virtual component so that everyone globally can participate, as well as our annual space report. And our space report is actually quarterly. And yesterday we just announced what the 2020 global space economy number was, and I will be sharing that with you momentarily. Our other division, Global Alliance, well, that's part of what I'm doing today, partnering with you, WIA Europe Roma chapter. I'm so honored to be joining you, having been the former chair for Women in Aerospace, doing government and public policy, so that falls under our Global Alliance division. And then the third division is the Center for Innovation and Education, and that's all about creating a workforce and economic development that relates to that global space ecosystem. And again, the ecosystem is a closed loop, meaning it's about exploration in outer space, but then tying it back to Earth and how it benefits us here on Earth. So that number is, for 2020, the global space economy was $447 billion. By 2030, Bank of America believes that the global space economy will be $1.4 trillion, and then by 2040, it will be over $3 trillion. So you're seeing great opportunity for exponential growth. There's also more than 85 nations operating in space, but there are three different types of nations that relate to space. Those are those that are operating in space, those that are emerging space ecosystems, and then those that will benefit from space technology. And so as we think about going to the moon as government agencies, as diplomacy, we have to take into account the three different groups that benefit from space. And although some groups may be able to benefit more, how do we make sure there's equity for all? In the US, the salaries in the space industry are higher than comparable industries. And again, the global space economy is 80% commercial. And when you think about commercialization, that is job creation, that's innovation and entrepreneurship, and that's about bettering life here on Earth. So this is a slide I'm going to talk through quite a bit as we think about what does that moon exploration phase look like. Well, first of all, it's going to be very expensive. Billions of dollars will be invested. And this is why, although the US has a plan to, with Artemis to be back on the moon by 2028, the Chinese have a plan by the end of the decade, the Russians are talking about by 2040. Are we going to do it all individually, or are we going to be able to, as humanity, find collaborations and partnerships to go to the moon together? Or will they be separate? So this is all part of that public policy, and where do governments play that role of how do we collaborate together, create diplomacy and policies? Will there be new treaties that come to go to the moon? I don't think that's likely in the current climate. Most nations do not want to give up sovereignty and rights. So more than likely, it will be guidelines similar to the Artemis Accords that the US is leading with. How do we come to agreement on how we'll work together to go on to the moon and beyond? So again, that's really a great part of the role of government, is creating that infrastructure and network with other countries. But then how will they bring the commercial sector in? So let's talk about the commercial sector. This is a very expensive enterprise to go to the moon. And why do we want to go? Well, there's great resources on the moon as well as asteroids and beyond, and our planet has finite resources. So when you think about comets that have large amounts of fresh water, or asteroids that have what we call rare earth minerals. We have a finite amount on our planet, but there's limitless on asteroids and other bodies. And then also when we think about renewable energy and eliminating fossil fuels, we know if we go to the moon to mine helium-3, we have the ability to look at nuclear power, which could then become a stepping stone to long-term sustainable energy on planet Earth. So again, there's great reasons to go to outer space. It is going to be very expensive, but as we start to look at resource depletion on planet Earth, that will become more and more of a priority, and the cost of going will be seen in a different lens. But it is the role of government to provide some of the seed funding to help encourage industry to pursue those markets. So I was in the U.S. Air Force and represented the government in partnership with industry on many activities. And the role of government is to help provide mitigation of high-risk activities. And to go to the moon, there will be high risk. This is very dangerous. It will be very expensive. But again, what are the benefits, not just for those resources, but I have the slide up that talks about all the technology. So I have biometric and health. To go to the moon, we have to overcome a number of activities and challenges that relate to health as it relates to human beings. You know, we were not designed to be in microgravity environment. Astronauts develop health challenges as they are on the International Space Station. So we're going to look at a whole host of new medical breakthroughs that will not only help us as human beings step out into the solar system, the moon and beyond, but we'll be able to create those health benefits here on Earth. So there's a great opportunity in the development of health opportunities. We also think of, are we initially going to go as humans? Or I have up there robotics and artificial intelligence. We're already sending robots. We're already sending rovers. The European Space Agency, the Chinese, the US, the UAE. So we are sending robots out. That is probably an initial way to start that exploration of the moon with robots using artificial intelligence, which causes us to reevaluate telecommunications, energy and energy storage. How do we want to use different energy and energy storage as we think about the vast climate changes on the planet? But again, that technology will benefit us here on Earth as we look at incorporating those energy storage solutions on Earth, using that artificial intelligence and robotics on Earth, for instance, in natural disaster responses or discovering and exploring our oceans. So when you think about what we're going to use for outer space for a company, the incentive is the technology along the way could be developed and commercialized and unlock not only innovation for all humanity, but for companies to be profitable and employ people and create economic opportunity. So I wanted to kind of share those thoughts with you. And again, there will be a number of challenges we overcome with the dust. How do we take care of those dust particles on the moon? And we see that problem on Mars as well, dust covering the solar array panels for rovers that are there. So we're really having to think through different ways of handling the technology as we explore out. So I talked about technology, great job opportunities, benefits. And again, for those of you in Europe, I know many of you are, I have the NASA Technology Transfer Office slide up, but ESA also has a technology transfer office. And already from space exploration, there are thousands of patents that are waiting to be commercialized in agriculture and healthcare and telecommunications and transportation. So as we think about going on to the moon and Mars and beyond, we're going to have more and more technology that we're going to be able to commercialize on Earth. So we're going to need more entrepreneurs and innovators and thinkers that are going to help us commercialize that. And these are some of the examples that we've already commercialized. We have 3 different types of space technology in our cell phones: cordless power tools, fire suppressant clothing, breast cancer detection, cataract surgery. So as you're thinking about that moon exploration, no matter what your discipline, whether you're a rocket scientist, an astronaut, or an artist, project manager, entrepreneur, medical officer, doctor, your skills are going to be needed as we think about going on to the moon and then Mars. Again, I wanted to share, what does that 2020 global space economy number look like? You can see when you look at the red and the blue, that is 80%, and that is all products and services. So again, industry is going to be a major leader, but to go to the moon, again, it's going to be very hard. It's going to be very dangerous, and it's going to be very expensive. And that's why government has to be a partner in this as a public-private partnership. What are some of the funding mechanisms we'll think about? Again, it will be the opportunity for those commercial companies to unlock innovation and commercialize it, take those patents from NASA or ESA and commercialize them. There are a number of other ways of monetizing companies now. We've seen here in the US, and I'm sure you've seen them in Europe, SPACs, we call them. You can't go to space without SPACs, which are special purpose acquisition companies, which are a way of now crowdsourcing for funding for long-term projects. And it used to be on Wall Street, for a venture capitalist or angel investor, they had a certain payback period when they wanted to see their return. For some technology now, what we're seeing as we look at space exploration or climate change and sustainability, we're seeing where the consumer now, those investors, are very interested in ESG, environmental, social, and good governance. And they're willing to invest their money longer, knowing that some of these challenges we want to solve will take more time. And another vehicle is SPACs, where the average citizen can now invest in emerging technologies. Now, again, this will be very risky as an investment opportunity, but it is a way for the democratization of space and investment in those activities to occur. So SPACs are part of it. Funding from the government, providing contracts for R&D and exploration. And then again, looking at grants and commercializing patents. I kind of shared a little bit that we're going to need that full workforce. 40 years ago, when we looked to go to the moon, we really looked at a government-focused, male-dominated STEM workforce. Now, as we look at the commercialization side and bringing all the ideas to the table, we need to bring all of humanity to the table. Men and women, young and old, different regions of the world, STEM professionals and non-STEM professionals. Business leaders and entrepreneurs will play a major role in helping us go back to the moon for that cislunar orbit and beyond. So at this point, I want to be respectful of my time, and I want to thank all of you. And I look forward to my fellow panelists, and then I look forward to additional questions. Thank you so much again.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. So now I will introduce Mr. Huffenbach. Bernard Huffenbach leads the Strategy and Innovation team of the ESA Directorate for Human and Robotic Exploration. In this function, he is responsible for strategic planning and benefit management, developing and implementing a comprehensive innovation plan for space exploration and supporting the preparation of future space exploration missions. He works since 29 years at ESA in areas such as strategic planning, policy development, program evaluation, strategic partnership development, and the future studies and the program definitions. So, Mr. Huffenbach, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and thank you for giving me an opportunity to share the ESA perspective on this topic. Can you just confirm that you see my slides?
Yes.
Perfect, thank you. So I will talk very concretely about the ESA Lunar Economy Growth Initiative, so concrete project ESA is undertaking to develop or support the development of a lunar economy. And to put this a little bit into context, what happened now? Let's see. Some issue with my presentation here.
if you want, we can try to share your presentation.
It could be a connection
Okay.
problem. If you could try to share it, maybe it's easier.
Yes, absolutely.
It seems to work now. Can you see it? It takes a while to build it up. Okay, just to put it a bit in context, the moon is part of the European Space Exploration Envelope Program of ESA, which addresses all the destinations where humans work and live today and in future, which includes low Earth orbit, Moon, and Mars. And the program deals primarily with big infrastructure projects, so the operation and utilization of the International Space Station. It includes the European contribution to sending humans to the moon. So we participate in the NASA-led Crew Orion spacecraft, developing the power and propulsion module. We develop elements for the Lunar Gateway. We also want to develop a large logistic lander for the moon in support of future human missions. And we also implement exciting missions to the Mars for discovering new knowledge about Mars and life on Mars, including the plan to return a sample from Mars by the end of this decade. But part of this program are not only these big infrastructure projects, we also want to support the development of what we call a LEO, Lunar, and Mars economy. And we do have a vision and a mission statement for this. And I will not read it, but for the vision statement, you see the 3 keywords here that we believe we need to engage private industry to drive innovation. We want to create a very competitive environment, and we want to help industry to put new products and services on the market. And 2 key features of all this is sustainable growth. We want to develop markets which are scalable, but we also want to have sustainable markets. And we want to deliver benefits with this growth initiative to society as a whole. And then when it comes to the mission statement, so what are we looking for? We're trying to collaborate with terrestrial vertical markets, which have maybe in the beginning not much to do with space. We want to engage new actors to drive innovation, and we want to create more value for society with our program. So that's why we are doing it. Now, what are we doing? In particular on the moon. So I will introduce a couple of projects. Our first commercial project implemented through a commercial partnership, or as you may call it, a public-private partnership, was to put in place the first commercially operated European deep space tracking station. That's now operational since 2021, June of this year. And we as ESA, we invested in the station and acted, so to say, as an anchor customer, because based on our investment, we now get free service hours. But the main business model of the station is to sell these services commercially to institutional and private sector mission. And I think it's really the first commercially operated deep space tracking antenna, because you require quite a large dish for this. Building on this, we are now working on establishing a commercial lunar data relay service link to a mission which is called Lunar Pathfinder. Again, we established a public-private partnership with a small European company, and we follow very much the same model here. We commit to buy services from this company, communication services for a certain volume, and in return, industry fully invests in the spacecraft. So the whole development project is industry-driven, and they carry a lot of the risk. On top, we act here as a, call it broker between NASA on one side and industry on the other side. We facilitate the barter of a rideshare with one of the commercial US landers in the target orbit for the spacecraft by providing in return to NASA, again, communication services. So here we are basically an enabler in 2 ways. On one side, we become a securing customer, but we also help to acquire cost-effective launch scenarios for the spacecraft. This spacecraft will start operation in mid-24, and again, it will likely be the first commercial relay spacecraft around the moon providing communication services. Building on this, the next step is to establish a very comprehensive commercial broadband lunar communication and precision navigation service, which will augment Lunar Pathfinder by installing a constellation of spacecrafts which really provide high data rate communication and precision for navigation, for landing, for lunar surface operations. Again, the idea is to do that on the base of a public-private partnership. We're currently in the definition phase for this activity. It's a competitive phase. And we're looking at a number of different partnership scenarios. And we're essentially trying to understand what is the level of ESA investment, the level of ESA commitment required to make this a business case for the private sector. This service should be operational by 2028. So it will be there in time when the first astronauts will visit the moon again. Similar, another initiative we're trying to undertake is to put in place a first commercial lunar mission in 2025, enabled by the Ariane, the Ariane 6, our new rocket to serve commercial markets. Again, here the idea is that we offer commercial rideshare providers, and rideshare providers are those who develop commercial lunar landers, an opportunity to get a free launch on the Ariane. And in return, we want to get part of the payload capacity. But then these commercial rideshare providers can essentially close a business case selling the other part of payloads. So our concept, our plan is to see whether we can realize a commercial lunar mission, which will deploy in a single mission multiple landers in different locations to really stimulate commercial activities on a lunar surface, and deploying a range of European science and technology payloads on different locations of the moon. And then another, I think, very concrete initiative we started in 2016 is called the ESA Space Resource Initiative. As mentioned by the previous speaker, one of the reasons we go back to the moon is to understand whether we can effectively use the lunar resources. From our perspective, we're trying in particular to understand how the use of local resources can help us to make our exploration more sustainable by supporting robotic and human lunar surface operations. And to this end, we have started really a comprehensive initiative focusing on R&D, but also on the definition of business case and future applications. Essentially, we want to develop a comprehensive capability in Europe to cover the whole space resource value chain, from prospecting to mining to applications. And we have the ambition to deliver a first operational pilot plant on the moon by 2030, which will transform the lunar regoliths, the lunar dust, in oxygen on one side and metallic powder on the other side. So the oxygen can be used for life support, propellants, or even energy production, and the metallic powder can be used for in-space manufacturing, and as such it could become an element of a future architecture for human lunar operations. We are doing this in very close cooperation with the recently established European Space Resource Innovation Center in Luxembourg, which will become a key actor in this ecosystem as we are progressing in the years ahead. Now, we are not just trying to develop capabilities and services, we also try to develop the market in its totality. And to this extent, we have initiated what we call the Business-Based Growth Network. Our intent is that with two initiatives, we are building really a network of, on one side, commercial service provider, on the other side, players who make use of the service, both institutionally and commercially. So what we are putting in place are so-called market simulation programs, which are there to develop the demand in a specific market. We have just recently placed the first contract to develop a market in the field biotech, where, for example, research on the International Space Station can create new knowledge and improve future processes. May even we see some kind of small-scale production happening in space. We have currently still an open IDT to select other market simulation program partners in other sectors, maybe in space manufacturing, maybe space resources. So the key purpose of this market simulation program is really to stimulate demand for future space-based services to develop the in-space economy. And since we are living in digital age, what you see on the right side is a prototype of our digital marketing platform, which should become operational in late August, early September of this year. And the idea is that this becomes a platform where we connect on one side the service provider with potential future customers. So in the end, it becomes a booking.com for sending your research into space in the months to come. And I think that gives you a snapshot on what we're doing. We have a similar initiative for the LEO economy, but today we talk about the moon. So I've chosen some key projects which we're currently initiating to help building the lunar economy. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Hupewag, for explaining us the role of ESA in this exploration project on the moon. So I remember to our audience that if you want to, you can share your question and use the Zoom chat. So now the next presentation is from the C-Lab. Mattia Pianorsi is a researcher at the C-Lab SDA Bocconi. His collaboration with SDA Bocconi began in 2015, where he has been involved in applied research project for corporate and financial institutions. Within the C-Lab, Mattia has enlarged his academic interests addressing venture capital investment and the startups development, with the main objective to create an innovation program for space endeavors. At the same time, he studies public-private partnership models from a financial perspective to better address issues derived from space exploration programs. So now he is carrying out research on moon mining, economic sustainability. So Mattia, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Clelia. Thank you, everyone, to be here today. It is a pleasure to talk to you about our activities within the lab regarding the moon activities. So first of all, I would like to say that I will present you a little exercise that we made a couple of years ago concerning the economic sustainability of a company that goes to the moon to extract resources. And but first of all, I would like even to make clear that if we imagine actually a lunar commercial market, maybe sometime in the future, we have to understand what would be the rationale. And as my colleague said, probably the main driver will be the shift of the human presence from temporary to permanent on the moon, so that we can create the basic infrastructures on the lunar surface to serve the humans. And so to give a rationale for commercial companies to create a supply chain, a lunar supply chain, rather than a terrestrial supply chain to fuel and to service the humans on the lunar surface and on orbit. Now, in this transition, probably the government will have a main role in the commitment of technology demonstration, validation, and possibly commercialization, so that if we reach this stage of technology, probably we will reduce the costs and the risks, and this would possibly boost not only space companies that were committed already in the early stages of lunar development, but even non-space companies and investors that potentially would see attractive opportunities on the moon, since the development of the technology has been taken and carried out by governments. And finally, the third driver is, of course, a private demand. So except for humans, we have to understand that companies on the moon have to have private transactions to be defined commercial activities, so private company to private company. And this can happen only if we have someone to sell our services and products. So as Bernard said before, probably the production of consumable products, as well as power station, an upgrade of power station, an upgrade of storage for consumable products, as well as manufacturing companies, construction companies for life support and habitation systems, and so on. Altogether, they will create the supply chain on the moon, and possibly they will create for the world a circular economy up there. Only in this case, we will avoid terrestrial supply chain, and so we will create a commercial market up there. This is a kind of little premise that I wanted to make. So, as I said, the demand is a fundamental to stimulate a commercial market. And right now we are talking about the lunar propellant. Lunar propellant, why? Because possibly we have an existing demand nowadays from commercial space transportation services companies. Because according to scholars, the lunar propellant will either optimize the payload of the rockets, so increasing the revenues if you want, or it would be cheaper than the propellant brought from Earth, supposing that the rockets are going to refuel by orbital depots on LEO orbit as well as on L1 position. So if we accept these thoughts from the scholars, probably with the lunar propellant, we will reduce the cost of space transportation. And so we will spur all the activities on the lunar orbit and surface, including one day, the presence of humans, not only as employees, but even as tourists. And so we will spur all the activities in the lunar supply chain. So with this work, we wanted to assess basically if a private company could be sustainable in producing propellant on the moon. We thought to assess two cases, one private company and the presence of the governments. And as methodology, we utilize the net present value on the one hand to assess if the project creates value, and so it could be acceptable. And on the other hand, the Monte Carlo simulation to understand how uncertainties can impact on the underlying determinants of the net present value, namely the revenues, the costs, the investments, and so on. So on the basis of the work of the Colorado School of Mines, of Professor Sowers and other authors, we established, first of all, an economic model to understand the architecture, so the identification of a commercial demand, the exploration activities made of exploration and prospecting, the development of lunar infrastructure, and finally the production of propellant. The business model, so a private company or a private-public partnership strategy that we had to evaluate, and finally the risk model to understand, as I told you before, the probability of different outcomes of the net present value. Starting with the business model, so the structure of the market was envisioned with one explorer taking care of the exploration, so understanding the quality and the quantity of the ice and the location, of course, and the prospecting activity to understand what could be the best technology to exploit that ice discovered. A miner, of course, and the structure of the company, we supposed a vertical integration strategy. So one company doing both the exploration and mining activities, but in the private-public partnership model, we envision the role of the government for the exploration activities. So understand the location, the quality, and the quantity of the ice. And finally, of these two projects, that one that maximized the net present value was the winning project, if you want. So here, the methodology of the net present value, maybe you know it, is a financial methodology to understand if an investment project is acceptable. When the result is higher than zero is acceptable, basically. And the second methodology that we used was the decision tree analysis in the model. So here you can see two phases of the exploration activities. As I told you, the exploration and the prospecting phase. In the public-private partnership model, we assume that the first phase was done by public, so we eliminate these uncertainties from this strategy. These are the basic assumptions of the two models. Please consider that you can retrieve all the information on the paper, The Economics of Moon Mining, which is available on the internet. So you can see that the determinants of the free cash flow to calculate the net present value were derived from the Colorado School of Mines work. The DPA probability, we assume a 50% of probability of success in the first phase and 60% on the second phase on the basis of the mining activities here on Earth. And finally, the cost of capital. So for the private model being riskier than the other model, we assume a 20% retrieved from high-risk investments of venture capital companies on Earth, and on the other side, the 70%. So as you can see on the PPP model, this first phase is not included because the government is going to do that. These are the results. So the private model gives us a negative result. So actually, if we want to follow the financial rules, we cannot accept this project. While on the other hand, the PPP model is very positive with $1.84 billion and a 30% of IRR. So with the deterministic model, so assessing the net present value of the two projects, we got that the PPP model was better than the other one. So we are going to accept this kind of strategy with the public authorities in charge of the exploration activity. In the end, the risk model, we wanted to assess let's say, the uncertainties on the determinants of the deterministic model. So as I said, the revenues, the operating costs, and the investments. This is an exercise because in project finance, actually, there are more very sophisticated models to understand the risk on the project. And my colleague, Professor Vetki, is an expert on that. And so we simulated the Monte Carlo simulation. And here, a Monte Carlo simulation basically is a simulation that repeats like we made 5,000 times all the possible solutions, all the possible outcomes if we are going to vary some of the determinants of the deterministic model. This is the result. So as you can appreciate, on the left tail of the distribution, the probability of negative outcomes is very low for this model. Actually, we have a good distribution around the mean, and that's a good point for a financial perspective because we don't have a very high variance across the mean of the distribution. So this is a good result. And finally, what were our conclusions? Of course, only a company cannot sustain the moon activities because if the exploration, for instance, takes much longer to find the ice, the quality, the location, the revenues will be far away from our business plan. So this is not good for investors. On the other hand, for the PPP project, as I told you before, not only the deterministic, but even the simulation were very positive. And for the government, of course, we have even some benefits. For instance, taxes, higher employment, and growth, and has, shall we say, even technology transfer for health benefits. And we even discounted the taxes and the taxes collected by government, and we found a 6% of return per year, which is not so bad if you think about the entire project. So this was our little exercise. We will continue to understand with the depot. So we want to understand the sustainability, not only with the moon actors, but even with the transportation companies and the depots around Earth and at one point. And we will let you know when we will have the results from that. Thank you. I know that I was very short. You can find all the information on the paper. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Mattia, for your presentation and the presentation result of this interesting research. So now I have the pleasure to introduce the Professor Veronica Vetki. Veronica Vetki is an Associate Professor of Practice of Government Health and Non-for-Profit at SDA Bocconi School of Management. She is a contract professor in long-term investment and the Public-Private Partnership and Financial Management at Bocconi University. Her research activities focus on public management, public-private partnership for infrastructure, and business development, project finance, business-government relationship, impact investment, and social innovation, public policy, and management for entrepreneurial development and competitiveness. She is the author of numerous national and international books and scientific articles. So, Professor Vetki, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much. Hello everybody, and thanks for this super interesting seminar. Everybody talk about public-private partnerships. First of all, I would like to say that I'm not an expert of lunar infrastructure. I'm, on the contrary, an expert of public-private partnerships. So my exercise within the Space Economy Lab is basically to support, to design possible public-private partnership models to fit with the infrastructure needs. Actually, one of the main common mistakes in the domain of public-private partnership is to apply standard models. Of course, on one hand, the standardization is useful to attract investors, but a standardization may not work because we really need to craft, to design specific models based on the specific needs, the specific features. So basically, we can say that we need horses for courses. I can't go on with, could you go on with my presentation? Thanks so much. Okay, so basically here I tried to figure out possible public-private partnership models. First of all, I would like to say that we don't have a specific definition of what is a public-private partnership. So for example, in the US, as well as in Canada, so we can say North America, also turnkey contracts, such as, for example, design, build, and finance are considered preliminary forms of public-private partnerships. On the contrary, in Europe, a public-private partnership is merely considered a sort of concession contract. Also, in cases when the market is not, only in cases when revenues are not generated by the market, okay? So only also in cases when there's no demand risk. Basically, based on my experience, academic and professional experience, one of the main difficulties when we structure a public-private partnership to attract investors is to treat carefully the demand risk, because the demand risk is very difficult to be transferred to private investors, also for traditional infrastructure, traditional greenfield infrastructure. A solution that we have found is the payment of an availability charge by the contracting authority, thus leaving on private investors just the so-called technical risk, such as, for example, the design risk, the investment risk, the construction risk, and the risk to deliver a quality infrastructure. So based on that, I've tried to figure out 4 possible types of collaboration, starting from a sort of a traditional approach, where in any case the contracting authority can allocate some technical risk. So, for example, the risk to deliver the infrastructure on time and on budget, moving towards more sophisticated forms of public-private partnerships, where the market can take in a higher risk. So basically, such models can be analyzed on the basis of a couple of features. So, for example, who is financing the asset, the ownership of the asset, the who dictates the asset specifications, who is bearing the risk of manufacturing and full risk maintenance, who operates the service, what kind of tariffs we can apply, who is paying for the infrastructure delivered, who bears the demand risk, who bears the technical risk, who bears the technological and refreshing risk, and who bears the coordination risk. So basically, the first model is, I called it public governance, procurement and financing, which is a sort of design and build, where the asset is financed 100% by the public authority. So that's why it is a traditional approach. The ownership is public, and basically the role of the private is just the delivery on time and on budget, the infrastructure, and the infrastructure is also operated by the public authority. So very, very traditional model. Then we move into a slightly more sophisticated model, which is a combination of a design and build and operation and maintenance. So two turnkey contracts that can be bundled together or they are unbundled. In here, the authority continues to finance the investment. The private sector is involved in the delivery on time and on budget, but the private investor is also involved in the operation of the service. And for the operation of the service, the private operator is paid with a fee. Penalties can be applied. Here, the authority, so for example, ESA or other competent authorities, can start to transfer a very small revenue risk on the service operator. And such revenues can be turned back to the authority, or in a slightly more risky transaction, we can also say that the private operator can cover with the fee paid by the contracting authorities the capex, while its markup, its profitability could be covered by commercial revenues. Okay. The third and the fourth model are properly public-private partnerships with slightly different features. The main difference stands in the financing, because in the third model, public-private partnership, or design, build, subsidize, finance, maintenance, and operation, the financing of the asset comes for more than 50% of the capex by the contracting authority, and therefore the asset is accounted on balance sheet. The private investor is in charge of the delivery on time and on budget, the investment. The private investor here, the counterpart, is a special purpose vehicle. The special purpose vehicle can gather together industrial and financial investor, for example, even if in general financial investors are reluctant to invest equity, at least in risky greenfield projects. So in case that they can enter in the special purpose vehicle later on in a sort of second stage of the project. And here, of course, there's a minor investment of money coming from the special purpose vehicle and also external investors, such as, for example, development banks. the authority pays an availability charge to get the infrastructure available. And once the infrastructure is available, the competent authority can decide to allow, for example, other public institutions to use that infrastructure free of charge. But the special purpose vehicle can also generate some revenues from commercial activities. And such revenues can be used to remunerate, for example, the dividends, okay, while the availability charge can cover the OPEX, can cover the principal and the interest. The dividends can be covered partially or totally with the commercial revenues. The fourth model is a model where there's a higher component of a private investment of money. So more than 50% of the capex is financed by private investors. The payment mechanism, in my opinion, should be the same, so with an availability charge, but the availability charge can cover, again, just the OPEX, the principal, and the interest. Of course, at the very beginning, if we wanted to attract financial investors, it can be important to ensure that the availability charge can cover a little bit of dividends, and the remaining part of dividends can be covered by commercial revenues. Of course, such models are flexible, and therefore, after the ramp-up phase, when commercial revenues are more stable and consolidated, it is of course possible to reduce the availability charge, because of course the special purpose vehicle is able to get more commercial revenues. The special purpose vehicle, based on the on Earth experiences, it is better if it is fully owned by the private investors, because in hybrid governance can be complex, and the PPP contract can ensure to the competent procuring authority to retain the control on the infrastructure, the control on the services, and the PPP contract can dictate specific KPIs. So basically, when the demand risk is important, because the demand risk, because the demand is non-predictable, in the past on the Earth, we experience, for example, mechanisms such as the minimum revenue guarantee. Based on our academic research, we found that the minimum revenue guarantee is very dangerous for contracting authorities, because of course there's a financial plan based on an estimate of potential commercial revenues, and in cases such revenues are not met, the authority has to top up and therefore to ensure that level of revenues. In such cases, when the demand is not predictable and very, very difficult to forecast, we believe that the availability charge is the most value for money approach. Of course, model C is also more value for money for the contracting authority, because the grant is paid immediately, and therefore so the amount of money paid by the contracting authority is paid immediately during the investment phase, and therefore the availability charge will be lower, and the impact in terms of net present value is higher. So these are just some preliminary potential types of collaborations. Also, in case of traditional procurement, it is important to set up a partnership approach with the market in order to get the best for such strategic and challenging investments. Thanks very much, and of course I'm here if you have some questions, but I see that the time is expiring. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Professor Vetki, for your interesting presentation regarding the PPP and to explain us some important peculiar aspects regarding the models, so the partnership. So now we have very quickly question for each speaker, and then we can conclude because the time is running. So I have a question for Shirley. So Shirley, considering the US space ecosystem, so how do you see the role of private investment in the public-private partnership scheme? So you mentioned before the role of venture capital firms, business, private equity, and so on. So what is your opinion about the role of private investment in considering the US ecosystem?
Well, thank you so much, Clelia. This has been a fantastic discussion, and all the panelists have been amazing. I've really enjoyed the discussion and thought leadership on how we're going to go back to the moon and stay on the moon. With the U.S. looking at what are the best ways to get there in the model that the U.S. has, which has created legislation and opportunities for privatization and commercialization. So by allowing commercial companies to lead some of the efforts. For instance, allowing launch companies to do launch activities, whether that's SpaceX or SLS, Space Launch System. There's a number of ways of returning to the moon, whether that's funded by the government with some funding. But again, some companies are doing that with their own funding. So some of the ways that we break this into parts and pieces to get to the moon, to stay on the moon, and then mine the moon and return those resources and then benefit Earth has many parts and pieces. So it's hard to put this all into a general bubble and say, this is how it'll work. But different parts are different evolutions. So I'm going to, like Richard Branson's Virgin Orbit, Virgin Galactic is a publicly traded company now. It's able to, it just did a stock offering. So depending where that technology is and the technology readiness level, will determine where the funding is, whether it's able to be funded by the government, which is high risk, as one of your past guests said. The government will take the lead in many of the activities that are high risk with that public-private partnership, doing the oversight and the requirements to make it happen. And then as things travel through the technology readiness level to where it's more easily transferred to the commercial industry, such as some of the activities we're now seeing transfer into low Earth orbit. Does the U.S. need to be operating, U.S. as a government need to be operating in low Earth orbit? Or is that really time to turn that over to the commercial sector? And the government now focuses on the moon and Mars, which again, high risk right now, lots of reward. So I share it's on a pendulum of the various technologies that I showed on that slide and where they are in that technology readiness level. What is the appetite for the investors, whether it's private citizens who want to invest in a stock through a SPAC, a special purpose acquisition company, or a venture capitalist who wants to invest, or is it the government investing? And again, there are multiple ways of investment, and there's multiple partnering ways with the government as well. So that was a long answer to the question is, it's going to depend on the technology, where it is in the readiness, what the risk factor is, and whether there's an economic payoff and how long that payment of return on that investment will be for those investors, whether they're private citizens who are investing in stocks or whether they're venture capitalists or angel investors. So it's really going to depend on where that is. So I hope that provided your audience with a little bit of flexibility to understand that technology and the investment vehicles will differentiate depending what the appetite is and the return.
Thank you, Shirley. And so I have another question from the audience, and for Mr. Huffenbach. So you before explained the role of ESA, but in your opinion, what is the role of the research institution in this kind of project, in particular for the commercial activities on the moon?
I think when we talk about the commercial or public-private partnership, I see the research organization a bit on the public side. For example, if I look at the analogy, we have done a lot of research on the International Space Station, and it was driven by the research community, by the scientists. Now we are trying to foster more industrial-driven, application-driven research based on a particular business scenario. But we still need the science, we still need the knowledge of the scientists. So what is changing? Science enables business, and science do not drive the research agenda. But without the engagement of a scientific community, the research organization, the business would lack critical knowledge. So in other words, I think the research organization can play a really critical role to open these new business opportunities through the knowledge they can share.
And also it's another question, but for Mr. Offenbach and also for Shili about the legal ecosystem. So in your opinion, which is the impact to not have a clear legal framework? So we know that now we have the Artemis Accord, but we know that there are some issues about, in particular, for the property rights and so for the commercial activities. So in your opinion, how do you see the future also commercial activities considering the legal framework? So it's for Chile and for Offenbach, this question.
I'll jump in first, and as I kind of shared, the world currently is not in a position where countries are prepared to sign more treaties, which give away their authority and autonomous being. But there is the framework to create guidelines, collaboration, diplomacy, and work together. Because as I highlighted, this will be an expensive endeavor, and the U.S. is already partnering with a number of countries through the Artemis Accord. There are other options as well. To pursue the moon beyond Artemis. So I think there'll be a consortium, and then how do we agree to the rules of that accord, and how will we work together? So I think our diplomats, so for those who are listening, we definitely need space scientists, but we're really going to need a lot of diplomats and policymakers and liaisons that are going to help us work through how are we all going to work together in this new environment without creating a formal treaty. So I'll allow my colleague to share their thoughts as well.
Well, we're doing already today a lot of commercial activities within the existing legal framework. A lot of the projects I mentioned can perfectly function without any change of the legal framework. I think the one area which in the medium to longer term requires maybe more clear principles is the area of the exploitation of space resources. Now, that's a very complex topic, but also, to be honest, I think we are probably a decade away from really making this a market. Currently, we're still investing a lot in research and development, and we want to do that together with the private sector. I think there's certain things we can already do today. Other things maybe are not so clear. I do think we need to start looking into this in parallel to creating clear business cases, to make it a purely academic discussion. But I think clearly, ultimately, we need, I think, a more clear legal framework, certainly in Europe. And I think we have quite some discussion with our member states at ESA, since positions of different member states on this particular topic are quite diverging still. And clearly, we as a European organization need more clear guidance from our member states what the expectations are, in particular for what concerns the role of an institution like ESA to enable such a market. And I can tell you today, for example, we have a green light to look into making use of space resources for exploration missions. So to, as your colleague said, sustain the circular economy of the moon. But we have an absolute red light to consider use of space resources for bringing them back to Earth.
Okay, thank you. It's very, very clear. And so I have a question also for Mattia. So Mattia, in your presentation, you explain us which kind of drivers that could stimulate the commercial demand. So in your opinion, what should be the future of the commercial market on the moon in terms of So considering the sector that will be involved in this lunar market, but also I want also to share with you the question that I shared with Mr. Uffenbach about the role of the academic, the institutions, so the research center, because I know that you also investigate about this topic.
Thank you, Clelia, for the question. Well, as I said before, probably a lunar commercial market will be driven by the presence of humans on the lunar surface continuously and permanently, possibly. So that we will have basically some commercial cases already envisioned nowadays that could be laid a foundation on creating an upgrade of the infrastructures that will be present maybe in the next 10, 15 years. So, as I said before, if we want to create propellant, oxygen, hydrogen, water from regolith or ice, probably we will have more power generation and distribution stations, as well as have storage for consumable products, manufacturing companies that will buy raw materials from who's gonna extract the metals as well as oxygen, hydrogen, and so on. And after, maybe we will have construction companies that will take care of not only of the buildings, but even for life support and habitat systems. So it will be a kind of, everything is going to start in our vision with the in-situ resource utilization, so that all the basic infrastructure will be upgraded to sustain the human presence up there. And of course, it will school maybe not only, employees from the space agencies or private companies, but even tourists, as we said. Shelley before mentioned Virgin Galactic. Now we will have Bezos. Maybe one day we will have people around the moon and maybe on the lunar surface. So if the intention of governments is to, explore Mars and go there, first we have to create a foundation of infrastructures there on the moon so that we can resupply all the basic materials from there, not from Earth. So this is more or less the vision. Thank you.
Thank you, Mattia. So I know that unfortunately Professor Vetki has another webinar, so if you wanted to share some question with her, you can directly contact her and to ask some question about the PPP models. So I know that the time is running. I have only the last question, so it's for ESA. Does the ESA Business Incubation Center have any role in this context?
Yes, absolutely. I'm working for the Directorate of Human and Robotic Exploration, and we establish this big, call it commercial partnership, but primarily with established business or service which are close to the market. But we do want to stimulate the entrance of startups. And for this, we work very closely with the Business Incubation Center, which are now all grouped under new directorates. The directorate, which includes all the commercial activities which are benefiting all the different programs. And that includes also business incubation units. So we will have a closer discussion with our colleagues from this new directorate to understand how we can create opportunities early on. And I give you one example. When we established the European Space Resource Innovation Center in Luxembourg, where ESA is a strategic partner, we not only become a partner for research, that means ESA is developing a lot of research capabilities which then will be collocated in Luxembourg. We also established a business incubator precisely to support startups to work on ideas for how can make use of space resources in the future. So there are absolutely opportunities for startups to enter into this new domain.
Okay, thank you. So I think that the time the webinar is over. So if you want, the webinar will be available also on WIA-E YouTube channel in the Rome playlist. So, and I wanted to thank you, the audience, the speakers, and also the support of the members of the local group of WIA, and also the C-Lab and the founding member of the C-Lab that support the research center. So I wish you good evening, and it will be our pleasure to update you on upcoming webinars. Thank you very much, and see you soon.
Thank you. It was a pleasure joining you. Have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you, you too.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.